Hello, parents. The Sunday school lesson this week is about Jesus' ascension. This is a big deal, even though it doesn't. We don't pack them in church on Ascension Thursday, the way that we do on, say, Easter Sunday or Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Ascension Thursday is really one of the important holidays in the liturgical church year. I guess actually, come to think of it, our attendance this year for Ascension will probably be the same as Easter, but. Be that as it may, we always do have a service on Ascension Thursday, which takes place 40 days after Easter Sunday. It was 40 days after Jesus rose from the dead that he ascended into heaven. So, over the course of those 40 days, he appeared numerous times. We had just one of those appearances in our lesson last week, The Road to Emmaus. There are others that you can read with your kids in your Bibles, but we're going to skip over them this year. Different years in Sunday school, we spend a lot of time looking at post resurrection appearances of Jesus. But I noticed how this particular curriculum is laid out. They want us to have some time to cover the book of Acts, which is a really important book about the early church. So we will be having some stories actually starting next week about what happened after Jesus ascended into heaven and how he kept on working and doing marvelous work in a different way through his people. But this week we get that turning point. Again, early, we'll be celebrating it technically in May 21st this year, the Ascension, and we'll have a special service that I hope you can tune in for in the live stream. But this week, that's the Sunday school lesson, the day that Jesus ascended into heaven. So, a couple of things to cover here. One of them, as Jesus takes his disciples to the Mount of Olives to ascend, they have a question for him. They say, Lord, at this time now, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And I used to think this was a really stupid question, how after all this, Jesus' death, Jesus' resurrection, the disciples are still wanting an earthly kingdom, and they're wanting Jesus to set up a throne and take over for the Romans and restore the kingdom to Israel. I used to think that this was a stupid question. But now, as I look at this text, I think it's on the right track, if not all the way there. See, the disciples are waiting for a restoration, for things to get better. And you know what? This is what was promised that the Messiah would do. Now, it actually, in some ways, is a restoration of Israel because he is still the king of Israel. He's the descendant of Judah who inherits the throne of David. So, actually, when Jesus returns, in some ways, this will be a restoration of Israel. The new Israel, the church. I mean, we call our church Zion Lutheran. We shouldn't think it's a bad thing that the kingdom will be restored to Israel. Just again, not the geopolitical state of Israel that exists today, or any particular ethnic group, but rather to the new Israel, the Holy Christian Church. Anyway, the disciples want to know, are you going to restore all things? And Jesus' answer is, I'm not telling you when the time is coming for the restoration. You won't know that. You can't know that right now. But nevertheless, one of those words I've been thinking a lot about lately. Nevertheless, there's something good that's happening today. And before their eyes, he's lifted into the clouds. They watch him as he essentially sails away, as he disappears from their sight. He's behind a cloud. He's gone. And then, of course, the classic tap on the shoulders. The angels are there like, oh, yeah, don't keep staring up at the sky after him. I think these are the same two angels that were at the tomb who said, why do you look for the living among the dead? I think it's the same guys. We don't know that for sure, but these angels now who are telling the disciples, he will return in the same way that he left. You're going to one day see him back on the clouds, this time coming instead of going. But until that day, here's something really important, and this is the really most important takeaway from this lesson of Jesus' ascension. He is not gone. Actually, in some ways, he's more present than he ever was. And the proof here is when you read in the Luke account what the disciples did after the ascension. They returned to Jerusalem with great rejoicing. They had joy that Jesus was ascended. And your first thought at that would be, this is a little odd, that, they just got him back. They thought he had died, and then lo and behold, he is risen. They can see him again. They can touch him. They eat with him. And now he's gone again with no word on when he's returning, if ever, in their lifetimes. And as it turns out, it wouldn't be. Oh, except for one brief visit with John years later. So he's out of sight, and yet they're rejoicing. Why is this? They're rejoicing because now in his ascension, he has filled the heavens. And what do you think he's doing in heaven? He is ruling and reigning over all things. The king is on his heavenly throne. And even better than before. Now, Jesus was in heaven before this. But you know what's better than before? He is a human being now. Yeah, if anyone ever thinks Jesus gave up his human nature, never. That would imply there's something wrong with being human. Jesus took on his human nature. He was in a state of humility, and now he's in a state of exaltation, but he's still a human being, and he's still God and true man. So, guys, you know what this means? There is a man in heaven, a human being, who is seated at the right hand of the Father, meaning has equal authority to the Father. That's what that means. And he is ruling and reigning over all things. He is working things out in the ways that are best, even if we can't always see or understand right now how that's working. Our King lives and reigns, and that's what the ascension is really all about, his reigning. And his ability to be everywhere, now having filled the heavens, now he can come to us in his body and blood whenever we celebrate the Lord's Supper. You know, when Jesus was in Galilee, he was in one place at one time. I mean, there's all these accounts in the Gospels of the crowds flocking to him, and they're surrounding him and always jostling, trying to get close to him, because he's only in one place at one time. And then he'd have to withdraw from the crowds, and he'd go out in the Sea of Galilee, or he'd go to some lonely, distant place just to pray, to get away from these crowds, which are always closing in on him. Guess what? The crowds now can close in on him wherever they may be. You don't have to make an appointment to go see one man in Galilee. He is now one man everywhere. He's everywhere, living and reigning. And so that's what the disciples had a clue about when Jesus ascended into heaven. This is why they were so joyous. That was part of the reason. Part of the reason is now they realized their risen king was now their ascended, ruling, and reigning king. The other thing is what he said to them before he ascended. I've got a plan for you. My rule now, my kingdom, will be evident through you. You will be my representatives. What an awesome thing. And it all starts with the ascension. And it really gets going in earnest 10 days after the ascension, the Feast of Pentecost, which we'll cover in our Sunday school lesson for next week. So another reason to rejoice about the ascension is now Jesus is letting them loose. I kind of compare it to an athlete on the bench. And this is how athletes feel right now, right? On the bench. Everyone's on the bench. You can't play the games. Think how great it's going to be, athletes, when you get the go-ahead, you can go back on the playing field. Isn't that going to feel good? Talk about rejoicing and celebration. The first time you run on that baseball field or step on that basketball court or jump into that soccer field. Like, yeah, I'm back in the game. These disciples never really were in the game. I mean, they got a little bit of a glimpse. I mean, there was one time Jesus sent them out for a few days to kind of get a little trial run going. But the truth is that they've never really been given the ball to run with. And now they are. Jesus says, it's still my ball game. I'm still the one scoring the touchdowns. I'm mixing all kinds of sports metaphors here, I know, but I'm going to give the ball to you, and I will score through you. And so the disciples were overjoyed. This is what the ascension meant for them. So this is what the ascension still means for us today. We have a ruling and reigning king seated in heaven, a human being like one of us in every way except without sin, also the true Son of God, who is working through us and executing his perfect game plan through us, even in this time when we're on the bench. Parents, this is you actually. Jesus is working through you as you teach your children the Sunday school lesson this week. God bless you. God be with you.